In 1992, a single family-owned bakery tucked into the hills of southeastern Tennessee controlled 52% of every snack cake sold in America. Not 30%, not 40%, 52. More than half of an entire industry, dominated by one company most Americans had never even heard of by name. Walk into any gas station, any grocery store, any school cafeteria in the United States during the 1980s and 90s, and you could not escape her. That girl in the straw hat. The little face smiling from a cheerful cardboard box filled with 12 individually wrapped cakes, all for 49 cents. She stared out from supermarket shelves in 48 states. She peered at you from vending machine glass. She appeared in lunch boxes from Maine to California, tucked between a sandwich and a juice box, like a small act of daily comfort. The factory that made her famous stretched across the quiet Adventist community of Collegedale, Tennessee, its machinery running around the clock, 6 days a week, producing hundreds of millions of cartons each year. By 2013, McKee Foods was shipping more than 900 million cartons annually. 900 million. If you stacked those cartons side by side, they would stretch from New York City to Los Angeles and back, multiple times. Then something shifted. Not a single catastrophic collapse. Something slower, quieter. A gradual withdrawal from markets that once belonged to them. From military-based commissaries, from Canadian shelves, from the cultural conversation that once made a little straw-hatted girl synonymous with American childhood. Today, the factory still runs, but the empire has contracted. The dominance has eroded. The cultural certainty has faded. So how does a company that once controlled more than half of an entire market find itself retreating from territory it spent 60 years building? How does the most recognized snack cake brand in American history lose its grip on the country it helped define? The answer begins with a man, a Depression-era car, and a 5-cent cake. Welcome inside the Little Debbie Snack Factory, where a family dream became an empire, and where the price of standing still is still being paid. 1933, Chattanooga, Tennessee. The Great Depression had hollowed out American prosperity like rust eating through steel. Banks had failed. Factories had gone silent. Across Appalachian Tennessee, men who had once been breadwinners now stood in bread lines. It was, by almost any measure, the worst possible time in modern American history to start a business. Other Doris McKee had lost his savings when his bank collapsed. He and his wife, Anna Ruth King McKee, had moved to Chattanooga from western North Carolina with 3 small children and no obvious path forward. O.D., as everyone called him, was a man of restless ambition and mechanical curiosity, a risk-taker by nature. Ruth was his opposite and his anchor. Cautious, methodical, deeply pragmatic. Between them, they formed what would later be described as a perfect business partnership. One person who saw futures and one person who kept the present from falling apart. O.D. Found work as a bakery salesman for Becker's Bakery, peddling Virginia Dare cakes out of the back seat of his 1928 Whippet automobile for a nickel apiece. The Whippet was a modest car, a cheap and reliable machine built for working people, and O.D. drove it across Chattanooga's streets every day, selling sweetness into a world that had precious little of it. He became good at it, remarkably good. By 1934, he had learned enough about the business and saved enough money to take a calculated risk. Jack's Cookie Company, a small, struggling bakery on Main Street in Chattanooga, had come up for sale. O.D. used his Whippet automobile as collateral to secure the purchase. He and Ruth signed the papers, walked through the door, and set up their home in the back room, separated from the ovens and the mixing equipment by a single hanging sheet. That was the beginning. Not a board of directors, not a venture capital investment, not an MBA strategy. A sheet hanging between the living area and the baking floor, A husband and wife working side by side, and the smell of baked goods drifting through the open door of a Depression-era bakery in Tennessee. Ruth's father joined them at first, helping operate the business, but OD's drive to expand created friction. He was always chasing the next machine, the next recipe, the next market. When the bakery prospered modestly, he wanted more. The problem was, ambition without capital had limits. And those limits were about to force a decision that would temporarily take the McKees off course and ultimately point them towards something far greater. 1937, Charlotte, North Carolina. The tension between OD's vision and his father-in-law's conservative approach had become impossible to resolve inside the walls of Jack's Cookie Company. OD made a decision that seemed, to outside observers, almost reckless. He sold his interest in the bakery. He loaded up what remained of his savings and his family, and he moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, where he built a new bakery from the ground up, designed entirely according to his own specifications, laid out to match the production processes he had been refining in his mind for years. The Charlotte plant ran for over a decade. It was not a failure, but neither was it the breakthrough OD had been chasing. He was a man constitutionally incapable of standing still, and the Charlotte operation, while functional, felt like a detour. In the early 1950s, the McKees made the decision to sell the Charlotte plant. They had intended, for a brief moment, to retire. Retirement lasted approximately as long as OD could sit quietly. Ruth's brother, Cecil King, was running the old bakery back in Chattanooga and was in poor health. The McKees returned home. In 1954, they purchased the bakery from the King family, renaming it McKee Baking Company in 1962. It was the same Chattanooga operation OD had left behind in 1937. 2 decades of detour, and he had come back to the starting line. But OD had not wasted those years. He had spent 20 years thinking about what a perfect bakery operation would look like. He understood production flow, equipment efficiency, shelf life, and pricing in a way that very few operators in the industry could match. And now with Ruth beside him, with sons Ellsworth and Jack growing into the business, he had the team to build something durable. In 1957, the McKees made what would become the most consequential geographical decision in the company's history. They moved the bakery out of Chattanooga and into the quiet neighboring community of Collegedale, Tennessee, a small town built around Southern Adventist University, a Seventh-day Adventist institution that shared many of the values the McKees held personally. Here's what nobody saw coming. That quiet Adventist town, those church-shaped values, and that modest new facility on the edge of Hamilton County would become the address of the most dominant snack cake operation the United States had ever produced. The stage was set. All it needed was a name, a face, and one revolutionary idea about how to sell a cake. August 23rd, 1960, Collegedale, Tennessee. The new Collegedale plant was running. Production lines were humming. O.D. McKee had developed a concept he believed could change the economics of snack food in America. Instead of selling individual cakes for 5 cents each, he would package 12 separately wrapped cakes into a single family-sized carton and sell the whole box for 49 cents. The math was transformative. Individually, those 12 cakes would have sold for 60 cents. The family pack was 11 cents cheaper, and it had a longer shelf life than almost every competing product on the market. The idea was ready. The product was ready. The only thing missing was a name. O.D. He gathered his family and a packaging supplier named Bob Mosher in his office to brainstorm. They needed something warm, something wholesome, something that felt like home. Mosher asked about the family's children and grandchildren. O.D. mentioned his 4-year-old granddaughter, Debbie, the daughter of his son Ellsworth and daughter-in-law Sharon. Someone asked if there was a photo. There was. It showed Debbie McKee sitting in her play clothes, wearing her favorite straw hat, looking out with the uncomplicated confidence of a small child entirely comfortable in her world. O.D. did not hesitate. He named the brand Little Debbie. Ellsworth and Sharon McKee did not learn their daughter was now the face of a snack cake company until the cartons were already being printed. Yet the first family pack of oatmeal cream pies rolled off the line on August 23, 1960. The original logo, rendered in black and white, was based directly on Debbie's photo. Artist Pearl Mann of Atlanta was later commissioned to create a full-color portrait, and following instructions, she made the girl appear slightly older, around 8 or 9, to give the image a more timeless quality. That face, that hat, that small smile would remain on every box for the next 6 decades. The response was immediate and overwhelming. In the first 10 months of sales, McKee moved more than 14 million cakes. 14 million in less than a year, at 49 cents a box. Meanwhile, something deeper was happening beneath the simple commercial success. A brand was forming, yet not a corporate brand built by advertising agencies or focus groups, but an emotional one, rooted in family and value, and the specific comfort of something sweet that anyone, regardless of income, could afford. That authenticity would become the company's most powerful and most irreplaceable asset. 1962 through 1982. Collegedale, Tennessee. The years after the launch of Little Debbie read like a sustained act of industrial will. Every year, new varieties. Every year, new production records. Every year, new territory. The oatmeal cream pie had proven the concept. Now O.D. wanted to fill every category, hit every flavor profile, reach every corner of the country. In 1962, O.D. traveled to a European trade show in search of the next great idea. Yet he found it in a minimized version of the French roulade, a rolled cake common among European bakeries. He came back to Tennessee and launched 2 production lines. By 1963, the Swiss cake roll was on shelves. It would eventually become one of the 3 best-selling snack cakes in the brand's history. The innovation never stopped. Fudge brownies arrived in January of 1969. Christmas tree cakes launched in the 1970s as a seasonal offering and quickly became an annual American ritual, the way certain foods become inextricable from the memory of a holiday. Donut sticks appeared in 1983 under the name Dunkin' Sticks. Cosmic brownies arrived in the 1990s, decorated with rainbow candy chips that became instantly iconic. By 1982, McKee Baking Company had reached $130 million in annual sales and held the 22nd rank in the American baking industry. That figure sounds modest only until you consider what they were competing against. Continental Baking, makers of Hostess Twinkies, was a billion-dollar company. Interstate Bakeries, makers of Dolly Madison products, was another billion-dollar operation. McKee had no national advertising department, no national sales force dedicated to pushing product into every grocery chain, no celebrity endorsements. What they had was a price that nobody in the industry could match. McKee sold their products through supermarkets for 50% to 70% less than comparable items from Hostess and Dolly Madison. Their shelf life was 3 to 4 times longer than a Twinkie. Their overhead was low because they operated through an independent distribution system, and their product was genuinely, sincerely popular. Then something extraordinary happened. The combination of relentless product innovation, unbeatable pricing, and a brand identity rooted in genuine American childhood nostalgia began to compound. Sales grew 10 to 15% every single year throughout the 1980s. The empire was not coming. The empire had already arrived. The competitors had no idea how far behind they already were. If you're finding this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue bringing you these deep dives into history. We're just getting into the most remarkable chapters of this story, and you won't want to miss what comes next. 1992. A College, Dale, Tennessee. Somewhere between the Christmas tree cakes and the cosmic brownies, between the launch of a third plant in Gentry, Arkansas in 1982, and the opening of a fourth plant in Stewart's Draft, Virginia in 1990, McKee Foods had done something that the baking industry had considered impossible for a company of its size and profile. They had not merely become competitive. They had become dominant. They had not merely grown. They had conquered. In 1992, the Little Debbie snack cake line accounted for 52% of all snack cakes sold in the United States. 52%. Their nearest competitor, Ralston Purina's Continental Baking, the maker of Hostess products, held only 18%. McKee was not leading the market. McKee was the market. But the numbers seemed almost fictional. A company without a national television advertising campaign, without a celebrity spokesperson, without a single flashy marketing strategy, controlling more than half of an entire American food category. The secret, as Forbes writer William Stern observed in a December 1992 feature, was a combination of price, product quality, and a shelf life that gave retailers a flexibility no competitor could offer. McKee's cakes lasted 3 to 4 times longer than a Hostess Twinkie. That meant less waste, less restocking, less worry. Retailers loved them. Consumers trusted them. And at prices 50 to 70% below the competition, the value proposition was inescapable. The Collegedale facility had expanded more than a dozen times. But a second plant had been built less than a mile from the original when demand outgrew the first. The Gentry, Arkansas plant employed more than 1,200 people by decade's end. The Stewart's Draft, Virginia plant employed over 900. Combined, the company's 4 facilities employed 5,000 workers, running around the clock, 6 days a week. 6 days. Not 7. Because McKee Foods was a Seventh-day Adventist company, and from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, the machines went quiet. It was one of the most unusual business practices in American manufacturing, and it never once hurt the bottom line. Sales climbed from $525 million in 1991 toward $800 million by the late 1990s. The empire was real. The fortress was strong. And then, almost imperceptibly, the world began to change around it. 1957 through the 1990s, Collegedale, Tennessee. To understand McKee Foods is to understand the peculiar geography of its spiritual home. Collegedale, Tennessee is not simply a town where a bakery happens to be located. It is a community built around and defined by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Southern Adventist University, founded in 1892 as Graysville Academy, relocated to what became Collegedale in 1916. By the time the McKees moved their operation there in 1957, the town was already deeply shaped by Adventist values. Saturday Sabbath observance, health consciousness, community solidarity, and a fierce commitment to education. O.D. and Ruth McKee were themselves rooted in that tradition. Both had been students at Southern, what then called Southern Missionary College. Their faith was not separable from their business philosophy. When they chose Collegedale, they were not simply choosing a tax zone or a logistics advantage. They were choosing a community whose values matched theirs, a labor pool shaped by the same ethics that drove their company. The results of that alignment were profound. McKee's relationship with Southern Adventist University deepened over decades. The McKee Library opened on the Southern campus in 1970. The university would eventually name its entire School of Business after Ruth McKee, breaking ground on the $20 million Ruth McKee School of Business in 2023. The prayer garden on campus was also dedicated to her memory. Inside the factories, those values showed up in quiet but consistent ways. The company ran 6 days a week, never 7. Employees who worked the weekend knew that Saturday was different. When McKee Foods sponsored NASCAR's Wood Brothers number, 21 Ford Fusion beginning in 2006, a contractual requirement stipulated that from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, every Little Debbie logo on the car, the hauler, and the crew's clothing had to be covered or removed. In a sport defined by aggressive branding, it was a remarkable act of principled restraint. The community surrounding the factory was also unlike most American manufacturing towns. Hamilton County, where Collegedale sits, grew partly because of McKee's presence. The company became one of the largest employers in the county. The relationship was reciprocal and genuine. Here's the thing about building a company on values rather than pure profit maximization. It creates a kind of institutional loyalty, both from employees and from the surrounding community, that money alone cannot manufacture. But it also creates a particular kind of conservatism, a reluctance to chase every trend, a tendency to stay in lanes. And sometimes, that conservatism is exactly the wrong response to a changing world. 1985 through 1998, across America. The peak years of Little Debbie's cultural dominance were not merely a business story. They were an American story, woven into the fabric of daily life in ways that transcended any single product or marketing campaign. In 1985, McKee launched a television advertising campaign featuring comedian Rich Little. You're running it for 5 years straight through 1989. Rich Little was among the most famous impressionists in the country at the time, and his Little Debbie commercials were warm, memorable, and inescapable. They introduced a generation of American children to the brand through the reliable machinery of Saturday morning television, cementing an association between Little Debbie and childhood comfort that no subsequent generation would quite recreate for the brand. That same year, 1985, the Little Debbie logo received its first update since 1964. The company introduced a Little Debbie doll through Horseman Incorporated in 1985 as well, available through back panels of product boxes. It's a piece of consumer engagement that seems quaint by modern standards, but was enormously effective in an era before social media. By 1982, Little Debbie had been named the official snack cake of the 1982 World's Fair in Knoxville, Tennessee. The brand sponsored a troupe of magicians who performed at the fair and handed out tokens redeemable for free cakes. 14 million visitors came through Knoxville that summer. Millions of them left with a Little Debbie product in their hands or in their memory. By 1987, the product line had expanded to 32 varieties, available in 41 states. By 1999, 66 varieties existed. Nutty bars, Figaroos, Caravellas, Golden Creams, Devil Creams, Fudge Rounds. Names that read today like a particular kind of American nostalgia. Ciao. Sales rose from $525 million in 1991 to approximately $831 million by 1998. That year, despite a modest growth rate of only 0.7%, the company still held absolute command of its category. By 1999, the Gentry plant employed 1,265 people. The Stewart's Draft plant employed 925. Both ran around the clock. Both had been expanded multiple times. Meanwhile, the world outside the factory walls was beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about the food inside those boxes. The era of unconditional appetite for processed sugar was ending. And Little Debbie, the queen of that era, was about to feel the first chill of a turning wind. 2000 through 2010, across America. Well, the shift did not arrive as a single news event. There was no smoking gun lawsuit, no FDA emergency, no catastrophic scandal. It arrived the way cultural change always does, gradually at first, then all at once. And what was changing was the American relationship with processed food, sugar, and the kind of industrial snacking that had made Little Debbie a household name. The 1990s had seen the first serious academic and journalistic scrutiny of processed foods' role in the American obesity epidemic. By 2000, those conversations had moved from research papers into mainstream media and kitchen tables. Books like Fast Food Nation, published in 2001, popularized a critique of industrial food production that resonated with millions of American parents. Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign launched in 2010 with the explicit goal of addressing childhood obesity, the precise demographic that Little Debbie had been marketing to for 5 decades. School cafeteria standards began to change. Vending machine contents in public schools came under regulatory pressure. The phrase clean eating entered common usage. Organic food went from a niche market to a multi-billion-dollar mainstream category. Whole Foods Market, founded in Austin, Texas in 1980, had grown into a national chain by the early 2000s, signaling that a meaningful and growing segment of American consumers wanted something fundamentally different from the snack aisle. For McKee Foods, the immediate financial impact was not catastrophic. Sales at the company remained strong through the 2000s. But the cultural headwinds were real and growing. Little Debbie snack cakes are high in sugar and refined carbohydrates. A single oatmeal cream pie contains over 300 calories and significant amounts of refined flour, hydrogenated oils, and artificial flavors. These facts, always technically true, had existed without controversy for 40 years. Now they were becoming liability. Consumer advocacy groups began naming Little Debbie products in lists of foods parents should avoid feeding their children. The brand's image, a smiling, innocent child, began to feel, to some critics, like an ironic emblem of a food culture that had failed those same children. The company was not oblivious. They attempted to introduce whole grain options and reformulated certain products. Yeah, but here's the problem. Little Debbie's identity was not health food. The thing that made her great, the sweetness, the affordability, the unmistakable indulgence, was also the thing that new consumer values were turning against. The fortress was still standing, but the ground beneath it was shifting. 2005 through 2015, across America. While McKee Foods held its course through the first decade of the new millennium, the competitive landscape it had dominated for 30 years was beginning to fracture and reassemble around it. The snack food market was not contracting. It was diversifying. And diversification in a market where Little Debbie held her share through price dominance was a structural threat. Private label store brands had been a minor irritant for decades. By the 2000s, they had become something more serious. Walmart, Target, and Kroger had invested heavily in their own generic snack cake lines, offering products that looked familiar, tasted passable, and often undercut even Little Debbie's already remarkable prices. These were not better products, but for a segment of price-sensitive consumers who had previously defaulted to Little Debbie on price alone, private labels created a new floor. Simultaneously, the premium snack category was exploding upward. Brands like Kind, Cliff Bar, Larabar, and RX Bar were capturing consumers who wanted indulgence wrapped in the language of nutrition. These brands cost 3 to 4 times more than a Little Debbie carton, but they were growing at double-digit rates annually, attracting the kind of millennial and Generation Z consumer whose lifetime value was enormous. Hostess, Little Debbie's most direct historical competitor, had gone bankrupt in 2012. McKee itself moved opportunistically in the aftermath, purchasing the Drake's Cakes brand, makers of Ring Dings, Yodels, and Devil Dogs, on January 28, 2013, for $27.5 million. The bankruptcy court approved the transaction on April 9, 2013. It was a smart acquisition, extending McKee's reach into the Northeast, where Drake's had cult status. But the broader competitive environment was still narrowing. Flowers Foods, the parent company of Wonder Bread and Nature's Own, was entering the sweet snacks category. Mondelez International, a global snacking behemoth, was acquiring premium brands at speed. The shelf space that had once been Little Debbie's uncontested territory was increasingly crowded with new entrants competing on health claims, brand story, and Instagram aesthetics. Meanwhile, a generation of young consumers was forming their food identities in an environment saturated with images of avocado toast and smoothie bowls. Little Debbie was many things. She was not an Instagram moment. The company that had once conquered the market by being the smartest, leanest, most value-driven operator in the room was now facing a world where value alone was not enough. We're halfway through this incredible story. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means everything. And it helps us keep making these detailed explorations of American business history. The most revealing chapters are still ahead. 2022, across America. The autumn of 2022 arrived with a series of announcements that, taken individually, might have seemed minor. Taken together, they told a quieter and more significant story about the changing reach of a once untouchable brand. In September of 2022, the military news publication Stars and Stripes published a report under the headline, "Goodbye, Little Debbie, Snack Cakes to Gradually Disappear from Commissary Shelves." The article confirmed what McKee Foods had communicated to the United States Department of Defense, the Defense Commissary Agency, and the Navy Exchange. The company would no longer supply its products to military-based commissaries. The reason given was straightforward. The regulatory compliance standards required of food manufacturers supplying military commissaries had become too costly for McKee to meet. The economics no longer worked. Simultaneously, McKee Foods announced that it would cease distribution in Canada. Their single Canadian distributor had chosen to terminate the business relationship. McKee, notably, said it was not actively seeking a replacement. For a brand that had pushed into Canadian markets with dual-language packaging, celebrating the move with fanfare, the quiet exit was striking. The internet reacted with alarm. Social media posts declared that Little Debbie was going out of business. The company was forced to issue clarifications. Fact-checking organizations, including Snopes.com, confirmed that the brand was not closing. But the underlying reality was subtler than either panic or reassurance fully captured. Little Debbie was not dying, but it was contracting. The brand that had spent decades expanding its geographic footprint from 41 states in 1987 to all 48 contiguous states, then all 50 states, then Canada and Mexico, and military bases worldwide, was now retreating from two of those markets simultaneously. Not because of bankruptcy, not because of a product disaster, because the economics of compliance had outweighed the economics of presence. It was the same logic that had built the empire, relentless attention to margins, to what could be profitably sustained, now working in reverse. The same discipline that had conquered the market was now deciding which parts of the market were no longer worth holding. But here's what nobody was asking loudly enough. If the compliance costs of a military commissary had become prohibitive, what other costs were quietly becoming impossible to absorb? The empire was intact, but its edges had started to pull back, and withdrawal, once started, has its own momentum. 2015 through 2024, across America. Little Debbie's competitive advantage had always rested on a single, almost sacred premise. Nobody could beat their price. Since 1960, when 12 cakes sold for 49 cents and the nearest competitor's equivalent would have cost nearly 60 cents, the McKee family had defined its product around value in a way that made price inseparable from identity. To buy a Little Debbie was to make a rational choice. You were not merely choosing a snack cake. You were choosing the smartest purchase in the aisle. That premise began to erode through the late 2010s, not because McKee raised its prices, but because the economics of food manufacturing globally began to shift in ways that compressed everyone's margins simultaneously. Commodity ingredient costs, wheat flour, sugar, vegetable oils, corn syrup, rose sharply through 2021 and 2022 in the wake of global supply chain disruptions and the inflationary pressures that followed the COVID-19 pandemic. Rising labor costs, driven by minimum wage increases across multiple states and intensifying competition for manufacturing workers, added further pressure. McKee Foods, like every snack manufacturer, had to respond. They raised prices. Not dramatically, not recklessly, but enough that the distance between a Little Debbie carton and a store brand equivalent began to close in the direction that mattered most. By 2022, McKee Foods' sales had reached $2.4 billion, up from $1.7 billion the previous year. But revenue growth driven by price increases is a fundamentally different story than revenue growth driven by unit volume increases. It is possible for a company to earn more money while selling fewer boxes, and fewer boxes means fewer households. Fewer households means a smaller cultural footprint. The company remained formidable. As of 2026, annual revenue was estimated at approximately $1.5 to $1.7 billion, reflecting the normalization after the pandemic-era surge. But McKee Foods employed between 6,000 and 7,000 people across its facilities in Collegedale, Gentry, Arkansas, Stewart's Draft, Virginia, and a distribution center in Kingman, Arizona. Meanwhile, the company committed to a $500 million 15-year expansion of its Apison plant near Collegedale headquarters, announced in 2020 and actively underway by 2023. That investment signaled genuine confidence in the future. But the question of identity, of what Little Debbie means to a generation raised on protein bars, TikTok recipes, and GLP-1 appetite suppressants, remained unanswered. That question was not going away. 2020 through 2025. Across America. Sometime around 2020, something unexpected happened to Little Debbie. The internet fell in love with her. Not ironically, not dismissively, genuinely, sincerely, and with a particular millennial intensity that no marketing department could have predicted or manufactured. Cosmic brownies went viral on TikTok. Videos of people recreating childhood memories, opening a carton of Swiss cake rolls, biting into an oatmeal cream pie, consuming a Christmas tree cake with theatrical reverence, accumulated millions of views. The hashtag associated with various Little Debbie products generated engagement numbers that premium snack brands spent fortunes trying to replicate and could not. Little Debbie had become, entirely organically, a nostalgia brand for the generation that had grown up eating her products in the 1990s and early 2000s. McKee responded with intelligence. They recognized what they had and leaned into it. Collaborations with Hudsonville Ice Cream produced a line of Little Debbie frozen treats, bringing Swiss cake roll and cosmic brownie flavors into the freezer aisle. A partnership with Goose Creek Candles launched cosmic brownie scented candles, a product so improbable it became its own viral moment. Kellogg's produced a Little Debbie Nutty Buddy cereal. The brand had entered the co-branded product space in a way that extended its cultural presence without requiring the company to fundamentally change what it made. New product launches began arriving with greater frequency. Banana pudding cream pies were announced for January 2026. Double-decker chocolate chip cream pies debuted for convenience stores in April 2025. Single-serve formats of classic products were developed specifically for gas station and convenience store sales, targeting a snacking behavior that post-pandemic lifestyle changes had accelerated. But here's the thing about nostalgia as a business strategy. It is a borrowing against the past, not a building of the future. The consumers experiencing cosmic brownie nostalgia are the same consumers who, in 10 years, will be the same age their parents were when they started worrying about ingredients. Their children are being raised in a food culture that Little Debbie has not fully penetrated. The brand's emotional resonance among millennials is real and powerful. Its resonance among Generation Alpha, the children born after 2010, is considerably less certain. The gamble was placed. The dice were rolling. In 2023 through 2026, Collegedale, Tennessee. Stand outside the McKee Foods complex in Collegedale on a weekday morning, and the scale of the operation is immediately apparent. Multiple large buildings, a corporate headquarters, a research and development center, production facilities running 6 days a week, and the small but perpetually busy Little Debbie Bakery store where employees and local visitors can buy products at a discount, including limited runs and test varieties that never made it to national shelves. The company is, by any objective measure, still a formidable American business. Revenue estimated at $1.5 to $1.7 billion as of 2026. More than 6,000 employees across 4 states. A brand recognized by virtually every American above the age of 30. And a factory investment of $500 million actively underway. Expanding production capacity that the company believes will be needed as demand continues. The 4th generation of the McKee family is entering the business. The real Debbie, Debbie McKee Fowler, the 4-year-old in the photograph that started everything in 1960, serves as executive vice president and sits on the board of directors. She is improbably and remarkably still part of the company her grandparents named after her. Her presence is not ceremonial, it is operational. The Drake's Cakes acquisition in 2013 had proven strategically sound, extending McKee's reach into the Northeast and adding ring-dings, yodels, and devil dogs to a portfolio that now spanned multiple snack categories and demographic profiles. The Sunbelt Bakery granola line had grown to a meaningful position in a healthy snacking segment that Little Debbie's core products could not address. Then something happened. The cultural confidence that McKee had carried for 60 years, the certainty that America would always want a cheap cake wrapped in cellophane, softened. Not collapsed, not shattered, softened. The 52% market share of 1992 had contracted to approximately 1/3 of the snack cake segment by the late 2010s, still the leading position in the category, but no longer the suffocating dominance it had once been. An empire built on the corner store and the lunchbox, on the 5-cent cake and the 49-cent carton. Yea, on a Depression-era couple's absolute refusal to be beaten, that empire was navigating a future its founders could not have imagined. Not failing, not finished, but no longer inevitable. And that distinction, quiet as it seems, is everything in business. Return to Collegedale on any given Tuesday afternoon, and the factory is still there, still running. Machines still turning 6 days a week, the smell of baked goods still drifting across the parking lot of a small Tennessee city that exists in large part because a man with a 1928 Whippet refused to stop selling cakes in the depths of the Great Depression. If you walk into the Little Debbie Bakery store on the property, you will find the familiar boxes stacked with cheerful permanence. The straw-hatted girl still smiling, yet still looking out from cardboard at whoever needs the particular comfort of something sweet and affordable. She has not changed very much. The hat is still there, the ribbon is still red, but the world around her has changed enormously. The first lesson is this: price alone is not a moat. McKee Foods built the most successful snack cake operation in American history on the principle that value would always win. And for 40 years, they were right. But price advantage is replicable. Store brands replicated it. Commodity pressure eroded it. What endures is not the cheapest option in the category. It is the most emotionally irreplaceable one. The brands that survive generational shifts are not the ones that won on margins. They are the ones that became part of people's identities. Little Debbie came close to achieving that. But whether she sustains it will determine the next chapter. The second lesson is this: dominance without diversification is fragility wearing a crown. In 1992, Controlling 52% of a single category felt like an unassailable position. In reality, it was maximum exposure. When that category came under cultural pressure, when processed sugar became a public health conversation rather than a private pleasure, Little Debbie had no adjacent identity to retreat to. The Sunbelt acquisition and the Drake's purchase were attempts to build that adjacent identity. They helped. They were not enough. The third lesson is this: faith can be a foundation, but a foundation is not a strategy. The McKees built something genuine, a company shaped by real values, rooted in a real community, run by a real family across 4 generations. That authenticity created a kind of loyalty and institutional integrity that purely profit-driven companies cannot purchase. But the world does not reward integrity automatically. It rewards adaptation. And adaptation requires a willingness to ask, honestly and without sentiment, whether what made you great is still what the future needs. From 1934 to 2026, 92 years. From a 5-cent cake sold from the back of a whippet to a $1.7 billion family empire. Peak market share, 52% of an entire American industry, current standing, still dominant, still present, still fighting. What remains is not the empire. What remains is the girl in the straw hat, still smiling, still holding her place on the shelf. I'm still asking the question every family business eventually has to answer: how long can sweetness last?